My name is Santiago Alba. I'm the Associate Director of Food Security at IDRC. A couple of logistics. There's translation available in French and English, so you can find your devices, I don't really know where, probably outside, and it will be translation. The event is going to be broadcasted live in the IFPRI Facebook page, and it will be in the IDRC Facebook, YouTube channel in a couple of days, also translated both in English and French. We have some presentations at the beginning, then a panel, and questions and discussions at the end. Thank you for coming. Thank you, the teams of IFPRI, IDRC, and colleagues of Global Affairs that have made possible this event. And with that, I want to please join me in welcoming John Lebel, President of IDRC.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Bienvenue. Merci.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning.
It's facebook.com/IFPRI, I believe. Is that right? Oh, the IFPRI person give me the thumbs up. That's it. I'm Jean Lebel at Santiago Mansion. I'm the president of the International Development Research Center here in Ottawa. And as many of you know, we are a crown corporation of the Canadian government that invests in knowledge, innovation, and solutions to improve life and livelihood of people around the world. And we're doing it under the Global Affairs Canada family. It is a real pleasure for me this morning to host this event in partnership with the International Food Policy Institute, IFPRI, Shenggen, that is with us, as well in collaboration with Global Affairs, and thank you for Celina Caesar-Chavannes to be with us, the Parliamentary Secretary for International Development of Canada. We are celebrating the launch of this report. Et le rapport cette année s'intéresse au
This year's report deals with a determining event where we are as an international community. The world economy is quite healthy most of the time, but hunger has increased in the world. We have to react to the fact that hunger has gone up in the world. After a decade of decline, we have to provide resources and find solutions to this problem that can take a rapid negative turn quite rapidly, working together with other Government of Canada partners, international funders, and civil society, as well as the private sector. So by working together, we contribute to the efforts to improve food and nutritional safety in the world.
Partnership, an initiative that promotes an approach that looks holistically at food and nutrition security. Partnership is at the heart of IDR's interest, but it is also at the heart of the CGIAR system, as well as IFPRI and the Canadian government. As an example, a few weeks ago, I was in the UK to launch a new program of IDRC with the United Kingdom Health and Social Care Services on antimicrobial resistance, which is a problem that affects animals, because, you know, drugs are becoming ineffective and illness are not cured, but affects also human from a standpoint, because developing the resistance in animal can get transferred to human. And then if we don't have, you know, the proper setup for combating illnesses in human with antibiotics that are effective, we are facing major risks for public health. Now, I'm bringing this example because, you know, it is a bit out of the talk this morning, but the roots of this work goes back to collaboration of IDRC with IFPRI. About 15 years ago, John McDermott at IFPRI and Marie Ruel, both Canadians, worked with IDRC to initiate a program on agriculture, health, and nutrition. And at the time, John is with us this morning, everyone were looking at us like, you know, who are these clowns linking, you know, agriculture practices with human health? And, you know, 15 years after, this is at the heart of the interests of IFPRI and of many organizations around the world, because it talks to some fundamental of food security and nutrition. When you talk, you know, about the classical definition of food security, you're talking about, you know, making food available, making food accessible, and making food usable. I won't get into the details of this. But progressively over the year, the nutrition aspect has become, more and more important, the quality aspect of the food, and that's, I think, the fourth pillar. But this morning, I'd like to point out that there's, in my view, a missing pillar, and, maybe sometime, researcher in this room or abroad should start to look at the fifth pillar of food security, which is gender. Without women in agriculture, we would be nowhere. Women are the engine of growth and development in many countries for agriculture. And despite that, the effort that we put in understanding better how to do it better with women at the center is still lagging behind. Thanks, there are initiatives with IFPRI, with the CGIAR, with IDRC, with Global Affairs Canada to look at this, and we'll hear some of this morning. But we have a big effort to do this. So this year, Global Food Policy Report takes an in-depth look at globalization. And amid growing anti-globalization pressures, it is absolutely vital that our sector pursue a path that prioritizes partnerships and collaboration. It is fitting then that we are here with you, Shenggen, at IFPRI. And it's always for me a pleasure to report that the first grant that was ever made to IFPRI was made by IDRC in collaboration with others. But it was a $2 million worth the investment in 1975 that brought us 50 years after to today. And today is a world where, research on agriculture is more needed than ever. Thanks to the Government of Canada and Global Affairs Canada, IDRC and Global Affairs have joined forces 10 years ago in the Canadian International Food Security Research Fund, a program that disbursed $120 million that have reached out over 200,000 smallholder farmers, vast majority women, test 185 innovation in the field. And very recently, we engaged conversation with the DFI, the Development Finance Institute based out of Montreal, created by the Government of Canada. The director there, Paul Lamontagne, and I have a conversation, and we think that we probably have one or two projects that are ready for, commercialization path with DFI. So, it's not the research for the sake of the research. It's the research applied, making a change in life and livelihood of people. And then it's the research that can change also the landscape by having it deployed at a broader scale, thanks to the support that we receive for the private sector for that. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Celina Caesar-Chavannes. That is the Canada Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development and La Francophonie. As many of you know, Celina holds, some quite important background in research and science, having been, at the head of a company that look at health and research intersection. She is a holder of an MBA in healthcare management from the University of Phoenix and an executive MBA from Rotman. And more importantly, is someone that, since she has become the parliamentary secretary, have showed on and on and on and on what it takes in terms of leadership to move the research to the policy and to see agriculture not as only a development challenge, but also making it grow to become, a sustainable growth issue for all, and particularly women. Celina, up to you. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, yes. Are you guys awake? It is a pleasure for me to be here today, and I want to thank the International Development Research Center and the International Food Policy Research Institute for bringing us together here this morning on what is a very important discussion around food. We should have had a long table in the middle of the room to do that. J'ai d'apprendre davantage.
And so we can learn more on the IFPRI report and the link established between women and girls, nutrition, food and agriculture, and commerce. These are important subjects, not only for your organizations, but also for governments and citizens. These complex issues are well laid out in the report. Circulation of goods, of investments, of people, and of knowledge play an important role, and play an important role to feed the world population, this growing world population, and also to support food supply systems.
Between IFPRI's report between women and girls, nutrition, agriculture, and trade. From a development perspective, when we consider that 46% of the world's population is rural, it is clear that the fight against extreme poverty and hunger will be won or lost in the rural areas of developing countries. Increased access to data and field knowledge can help farmers improve productivity, increase their ability to feed their families, as well as earn a living. 43% of women in developing countries work in agriculture. Unfortunately, rural women don't have the same access and control over land and productive resources as men do. But if they did, research has shown that food production would jump by 30%, enough to pull 150 million people out of hunger. To achieve gender equality, we need to address the social and economic power imbalances, especially for rural women who often face exclusion, vulnerability to exploitation, harmful practices, biases, and even conflict and violence. Not
only do rural women find themselves in a vulnerable situation, but they have an enormous potential to impact positive change. This is why we need to include them in our agreements, in our policies for development.
We could reap if women were fully able to participate in global commerce. In Canada alone, if we remove the barriers to more women engaging in international trade, we would boost our economy by $150 billion. According to a McKinsey Global Institute, advancing women's equality could add 12, and they always use this 12 number, I say 12 to 28 trillion dollars to the global economy by 2025. I just think women are that powerful. Canada's new trade agreements are factoring in the power and potential of women and girls. We are proud to support the Declaration on Trade and Women's Economic Empowerment and encourage other countries to do the same. Another powerful reason for supporting and focusing on women's economic empowerment is the fact that women's involvement in the economy is also a viable means of preventing conflict and ensuring a stable base for economic development for everyone. Canada recognizes the crucial role women and girls play in poverty reduction and the eradication of hunger. And it's for this reason that the input of many organizations, many here in this room, have assisted in developing Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy. It is still shocking that 60% of the world's 800 million undernourished people are women and girls. And that means that in societies, women and girls receive smaller portions, eat later, and eat less nutritious foods than their male counterparts in their family. The world is at a turning point for women where they are speaking up and their voices are being heard. Canada is committed to amplifying women's voices and promoting their leadership at all levels. We have introduced the Women's Lead and Leadership Program and have allocated $150 million over 5 years towards this. And Canada also intends to support local agricultural businesses led by women, helping them scale up their businesses and activities and expand their impact in their local economies. And IDRC plays a critical role in strengthening the links among Canadian and developing country researchers, civil society, and governments. Your vast networks with partners will help turn these ideas into action that change lives. Right now, the think tank initiative managed by IDRC is helping to strengthen 43 policy research institutions in 20 developing countries over 10 years. This kind of innovation has tremendous potential for improving the lives of women, not only because they feed their families, but also because many of them are farmers. The Canadian International Food Security Research Fund, funded through Global Affairs, has given us 144 innovations that have been tested and 37 that are also effective, that are so effective, they have been scaled up to benefit more than 300,000 small-scale farmers in 24 different countries. Canada has also been a long-term supporter of the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research and its food policy in collaboration with an extensive network of partners, including national and regional research institutes, civil society organizations, academia, development organizations, and the private sector. This work is even more relevant today as the world works to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. I look forward to hearing more from our next speaker about the key findings of the 2018 Global Food Policy Report and the views of our panel on the challenges facing researchers and practitioners in agriculture and food policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Celina, for those remarks. And I forgot before I go any further to do what I normally do is, to show my board there's a lively audience over here. Can you all wave? I'll take a picture and I'll tweet it afterwards. Please, come on, smile. Yes, it's early in the morning. Great. And this portion over here, that way I can see there's a full crowd and, everything is perfect. Good. This is done. We're in the years of social media, sorry. I'll do a selfie with myself now. No. It's now my pleasure to introduce IFPRI Director General Shenggen Fan. And Shenggen, Dr. Fan, has been Director General since 2009 and has joined IFPRI more than 20 years ago. We have similarity. I joined IDRC more than 20 years ago also. Shenggen is an economist that has been trained in Nanjing in China as well as in Minnesota. That's a stretch that you have to explain to me one day. He's an economist by training. And he's not only an economist, he's someone that has provided to IFPRI the leadership to go beyond only doing the policy work out of Washington, but decentralizing activity in the region, as he was explaining just before this meeting. He received in 2017, last year, the Food and Management Excellence Award, which is essentially the Nobel Prize for management. I'm happy to know that there's someone looking at management with a Nobel Prize now, but I'm happier that it's you, Shenggen, that received this award. And in 2014, he was awarded also the Younger Hero Award from the World Food Program for the leadership that he has displayed at the IFPRI, but also throughout his career in solving problem of food security. So Shenggen, it's really an honor to have you with us, to have organized this jointly with the support also of Global Affairs Canada, and I will invite you to the podium to present to us, what's in this year's report. Thank you very much.
Well, Your Honorable Permanent Secretary of the Parliament, Celina, Caesar-Chavannes, and the President Jemimah, it's a great pleasure to be here. IFPRI was founded in 1975. I think Canadian has lots of things to do with it because IDRC was original funder. We had three funders, the IDRC, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. So without IDRC, there wouldn't be IFPRI today. So I'm really grateful to Canadian support. And over the last 40 years, the Canadian financial support, also international support, really pushed IFPRI to do so many different things. The financial support from CEDA, from IDRC, of course, and also intellectual support, like John McDermott, the great Canadian. So we have a bunch of great Canadians, more on nutrition side, more on, let's say, food system, health side, and maybe more, maybe even gender. I really hope that this sort of partnership between Canada and IFPRI can further strengthen through the activities like this. So I come here quite often, maybe every other 2 years. I mean, this is exactly the purpose why we are here, to engage with you, to listen to you, to share what we have learned, to further strengthen our partnership. So here at IFPRI, every year we introduce or we launch a global food policy report. So this year, I think, 7th edition. So every year we try to introduce a topic that is so relevant, so important, related to global food policy issues. Obviously, we'll review the major developments of food policy issues. If I can have the first slides. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Okay, all right. Looks like I need some technical assistance here. All right, getting there? Oh, okay. Somebody's doing something. Great.
Put this detective. And here it is.
Okay, here we go. Wonderful, thank you. Okay, yes. So every year we try to review some of the major developments that are very relevant to our global food policy development. So one of the key features for 2017, or maybe even some years before that, is increased inequality. You will see that 1% of top income owner has increased their share in the total income. Look at India, look at China. In some of the emerging economies, that the inequality has increased so fast. Even in the US, even in some of the countries, I don't know whether we have any number from Canada. What does that mean? It means the increased inequality will affect a lot of poor's access to food, particularly healthy and nutritious foods. We have seen increased sort of a gap between rich and poor in accessing to healthy and nutritious food. And obviously, some of the global hunger issues in 2017 was driven by the conflicts, driven by the climate change. The climate change pushed the conflicts. So there's another report called a Global Report on Food Crisis. That report shows that in 2017, more than 142 million people were at a risk of food insecurity, partly because of conflicts, partly because of climate change in South Sudan, Yemen, northern Nigeria, and Somalia. And even worse, because of this increased inequality, so in 2017, the global hunger number is 850 million people, so larger than the 2015 or 2016 number. Jean mentioned that I received an award called Hero Hunger. I think part of the reason because I solved my own hunger problem. So I came from China, Nanjing. I was hungry, I was malnourished, but over the last 40 years, 50 years, I was able to remove myself from hunger and malnutrition. But most importantly for 2017 is the rapid development or sentiments of anti-globalization, Brexit, the political landscape changes in US and in many other countries. I'm afraid that sort of anti-globalization sentiments will set back the progress we have achieved in cutting hunger and malnutrition by many years. So why? Anti-trade. We have seen that the sort of unilateralisms have replaced its multinationalisms. And investment. We have seen lots more restrictions on investment, foreign direct investment. And we have seen lots of sort of tightening of the borders. Even for IFPRI staff to travel to different countries or receiving staff from other countries to visit us in headquarters, even our board members have faced tremendous obstacles in migration. So not mentioning about the poor people, hungry people move from, let's say, from Syria to Europe. So that, again, will affect global food and nutrition security. the knowledge and information. So knowledge and information must continue to flow freely. I will come back to that. And the farm policy in OECD countries, in US, in Europe, and in many other countries. Again, here I wanted to inform you that because of the threat of the anti-globalization, some of the domestic policy reform, again, may go back, may be reversed. And, well, the weak global governance, the UN agencies, the network, the CGIAR reform, I think we still continue. I mean, John, about together with me, we're very part of the CGIAR reform. I think the agenda is not finished. The mission has not been accomplished. More needs to be done. Now, okay, how do I go back? This one, right? Okay, the free flows of goods. We benefit tremendously of the free trade or transparent trade. The goods can move around in the sort of a temperate zones. Like here, we can have access to healthy, nutritious foods from tropical areas, mangoes, bananas, and so on. And again, in some of the food deficient countries, they can access to stable foods like rice, wheat, maize, and beans from US, from Europe, and from Canada. So that free trade helped to solve hunger, malnutrition problem of millions of people by increasing availability, by increasing diversity, and beyond. Now the question is why we have such a sort of setback on trade, on anti-globalization, partly because certain people have not benefited from that trade. So today our agenda is to design certain policies to make sure that some of the people left behind will benefit from the trade, the training, through social protection or through education. We say that not even 30 years ago when China joined the WTO, we thought some of the poor and hungry people will be helped out through training, through capacity building and so on, but it didn't happen. We must pay attention to that. Otherwise, this sort of anti-trade will continue. Then investment, huge investment globally in agriculture and in food. That helped to bring technologies, bring know-how, and bring markets to the place where the investment has been done in Africa, in South Asia, in China, even here in North America. And we know that around 2007, 2008 food crisis, there was so-called land-grabbing phenomena in the countries like China, South Korea, and Middle East, go to Africa, go to South Asia, to lease the land to produce food, to produce agriculture products. Good or bad, but we needed evidence. Evidence showed that certain investments do benefit smallholders by bringing the markets, technologies, outsourcing opportunities for smallholders. Again, to move forward, how can we make sure that all the smallholders will benefit from that type of investment? Securing land rights will be so critical. If the farmers own the land, they have the security rights. They can lease the land to multinational companies, or they can form some sort of association by themselves to increase their bargaining power with multinational companies. So securing land rights, to me, is the most critical when we deal with multinational companies' investment. The FAO, IFPRI, and many other international organizations have developed these so-called voluntary guidelines on land tenure. Yes, that guideline is there. We must make sure that we move towards implementation. The good news is African Union has adopted that, whole African Union has adopted that concept to begin to monitor, to track the land tenure issues. So when the foreign investment come, the smallholders' rights, particularly women-headed households, will be protected. Now, the women's empowerment, I think we learned quite a bit on this. I think some of our top leaders, I think, where's Agnes? Agnes, yeah, Quisumbing. She joined IFPRI in 1996. I think you're one of the first. 1996, right? But 1995, I'm sorry, yeah, Marie Rowe joined in the same year as I did. So I think because of her leadership, we built a very strong team on gender. And this year's report, although we didn't have a separate chapter on gender, on women, but all the chapters included in this report must make sure that women are reflected. That's in trade, in investment, in knowledge sharing, in migration. So the empowering, so the globalization it can be a challenge, but more important or equally important, could also have the opportunity to empower the woman. So for example, that we need to provide the policy environment for women to play that role. I think her Honorable the Permanent Secretary said it very well. Women needs to access to assets. Women needs to access to extension services, agriculture services, knowledge. Women needs to access to political voices. I think political voice is very critical. Women needs to access to association, community association, whatever association, so they are part of that community movement to empower themselves. Empower themselves is very critical. I'm not going to expand too more. I know that there will be a special panel. So Agnes and many others will zoom in that how can we really empower the woman under these rapid changes of globalization, of the global integration. And the international migration. Again, our human history is a history of migration. You know, this part of the new world, we received so many migrants. And even in my own country, China, over the last 5,000 years, it's a history of migration. Why do people move? Because of conflict, because of the wars, natural disasters. And we have strong evidence to show that migration helps to solve food security of the migrants, but also the people left behind. And we must make sure that that migration will remain to be open. And I really applaud the Canadian government in this regard, to open-minded, and even today, you know, the country are still committed to receive the refugees or other kinds of migrants. Now, if you look at the household income and the probability of migration in Bangladesh, you will see there's a strong correlation between migration and household income. So when the people move out, they will earn more money, they will send the money back. That also helps the local development of agriculture and the food system. Even seasonal migration can help. You might remember in the Green Revolution, the migrants from Eastern India, like Bihar, Orissa, they moved to the Green Revolution belt, the Punjab, Haryana. So they helped to solve the labor shortage problem in the Green Revolution belt. Meantime, they send the money back to Eastern India. So that was a win-win situation. Win for Eastern India, win for northwest part of India. Now, even in Bangladesh, latest study shows that seasonal migration, I mean, there is a lean season, maybe 2 or 3 months in Bangladesh, just before the new crop is harvested and before the old food has been eaten. So there is a 2 or 3 month window that the people usually do not have enough to eat. They eat maybe twice a day, maybe even once a day. But the seasonal migration, so the farmers can move to a city or somewhere to do some seasonal casual labor. Even that can help to improve food nutrition security of many people, many households during that lean season. Now, access to knowledge and data. This is so critical. The CGIAR was formed in 1971, as John Lebel mentioned. Part of the reason is to bring knowledge, technology together to share that with developing countries, to empower the national research system. So that knowledge sharing is very critical. We must not stop that. But because of the latest sort of anti-science, the anti-science, not just anti-climate science, anti-any science, anti-facts. So the CGIAR, the international global community, must stand very strong to make sure that data, information, knowledge, analysis we have done are shared with anybody. And if you look at one of the data set we collected in Bangladesh, we do enough survey, we collect enough data. The CGIAR collects the data, enough of data. Here, particularly at IFPRI, we conduct household survey in some of the major countries like Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Ghana, and beyond. And we share that data with anybody. But look at the downloads of that data set. Tremendous increase over time. So we want to make sure that everybody in the CGIAR must open their data. So there is an initiative called Big Data by CGIAR, and they are working together to make sure that all the data CGI is connected will have open access, will share with anybody without any cost. We even provide support to build their capacity in using that data. So IFPRI and another CGI center called CIAT are coordinating that effort. Oh, yep. Let me go back to the other one. Yeah, the domestic farm policy reform. I must say that OECD countries has made a tremendous progress. That I think Brad is here, right? You were part of the agriculture. Canada, we're analyzing the support policies, subsidy policies. I must congratulate OECD countries, including Canada, in reducing farm subsidies, in reform farm subsidy to delink the production from farm support. So now today, I think 20% of your agriculture products are still linked with subsidies, but it's not linked with production. So more income support, more investment in rural infrastructure, more support in insurance program. So these are allowed under WTO. I must say that the OECD has made progress on that. However, under the current sort of threat of trade war, particularly between US and China, I'm afraid US or many other countries may begin to use support policy to support farmers because soybean, pork, and meat are produced in some of this kind of farm bill. There's a strong political support of the current administration. And they wanted to make sure that these farmers will not upset because of this trade war. And who is going to lose? I think everybody will lose because OECD countries may begin to reverse some of the progress they have made over the last 20 or even 30 years. Now the governance, as I said, the governance, global governance, still yet to be further strengthened. 3 Rome-based agencies, organizations, the CGIAR, and all kinds of formal, informal network. How are we going to reform it? Can we set up a similar, it's IPCC, this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I thought that was a good platform to share the data information with everybody. So that platform really helped the world to rethink about the climate change. That's why the climate change is very high on our agenda. Can we set up a similar structure to provide data, information, knowledge analysis to everybody? Not just my own interest, your own interest, it's everybody. And radical changes. We are facing some radical changes, particularly in the current anti-globalization, anti-global integration. Let's work together to provide the data, evidence, and to make sure that poor and hungry people will not suffer from that. I know that the Canada is very nervous about the NAFTA renegotiation, whatever. We must make sure that poor people, hungry people in this part of the world, and maybe in Mexico, will not suffer from that. And the trade is good for everybody. Let's work together to address the issues of the people left behind who will not benefit from that trade. Okay. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Shenggen, for those remarks. A landmark document that has been produced now for the last 7, 8, 9 years, and that I'm always looking forward to receiving. These are the documents that makes a difference. They are based on rigorous science, sound evidence, and provide, a set of data that is available. And I think that's very important in this global world. We're going to move to our panel discussion, and I'm going to invite my colleague. I'm trying to see where is Jemimah. Jemimah and Njuki. Jemimah is one of our experts in-house at IDRC. She has been with us for the last 5 years, at least, yes, as a senior program specialist working on agriculture and food security issue, and particularly keeping us on our toes vis-a-vis the gender dimension of agriculture in practical terms. And Jemimah has flown all the way from our Nairobi office to here to attend certain meetings, but she is doing us the favor of staying a few days longer while her children are all by, not themselves, but are all alone without their mother in Kenya. I have to say that Jemimah is not only one of our expert staff, but she's also represent the type of leadership that we have at IDRC. She's also an Aspen Fellow, Aspen Institute Fellow, where she has been devoting a lot of her time and research time on exactly that issue, women in agriculture and how to make it sustainable and growing. So Jemimah, without any further ado, I'll ask you to introduce your panelists and you'll lead the conversation into the topic of the day. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jean. Sometimes when he introduces me, I'm not sure he's talking about me. It's really a pleasure to be leading this panel discussion. Thank you, Shenggen, for that very concise and deep analysis of the report. It definitely helps the panel to pick out some of the pertinent issues. This morning, we almost had a perfect all-female panel. And then we got some gentlemen, and we made the perfect panel of ladies and gentlemen. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the panel. First up is Szabo. And Sue is the Director General at Global Affairs Canada, where she's leading the Food Security and Environment Division. Please, Szabo. And next is Faris Ahmed. And Faris is the Director for Policy and Campaigns at USC Canada, where he leads policy work, but also works on ecological agriculture, biodiversity, and food sovereignty networks in the South and in Canada. Welcome, Faris. Agnes Quisumbing is our third panelist, and Agnes is a senior research fellow in the Poverty, Health, and Nutrition Division of the International Food Policy Research Network, where she's been doing a lot of extensive research on women in agriculture and on gender. We were going to be joined this morning by Sonia Laszlo from McGill University. She couldn't make it due to a family emergency. And Jane Rabinowitz from USC Canada, who is ably represented by Faris Ahmed. And Shenggen, because the audience hasn't had a chance to ask you questions, I'd like to ask you to join us as well. You are not going to get away without questions. So listening to Shenggen and Jean, what really comes to my mind is how urgent it is. You know, we've been having this goal of ending hunger by 2030, and it's sort of been up there. And looking at some of the numbers in this report, it just came to me that we have to do this. We still cannot have 815 million people that are undernourished, 155 million children that are stunted. And sometimes we look at these figures, and what I want us to think about today is that 815 million, that 155 are actually people. They're not a number. And it's going to be the responsibility of all of us. And this morning we have a panel that has a mix of researchers, people working in government, people working in civil society, because we all have our bit to do to end hunger by 2030. We'll be talking about women's empowerment and the role of women in ending hunger, but also the vulnerability that they have to hunger and some of the barriers we need to address, migration, some of the points that Shenggen brought up in his presentation. But what I would like the panel to do is also think forward. That's the status. How do we move from where we are between now and 2030. So help me in welcoming the panel. So I'm going to start right next to me with Sue. The Parliamentary Secretary talked about the feminist international assistance policy, the role that women have in achieving food and nutrition security, but also some of the barriers that they face. And what I would like you to discuss this morning is, in the context of the current status of food insecurity in the world, how is Canada moving forward contributing to developing local food systems, especially in the developing world?
Great. Thank you, Jemimah. And thanks to IDRC and to IFPRI for inviting me here this morning. Although, given that I see many colleagues in the audience, I'm also a little bit daunted because I know the level of expertise that is in the audience. Mais je suis très content.
I'm extremely pleased to participate on this panel with our partners, our long-term partners in the development world. And I would like to congratulate IFPRI for looking at this very difficult issue of globalization and to bring a very analytical lens to the multiple factors that are presented here. This new report deals with the complexity of the situation, increase of climate change, catastrophes, large population migration, international trade that is increasingly protectionist, but also we speak to opportunities to improve the efficiency of the agri-food system, notably with regards to innovation. And I'd like to come back to this theme.
Not be better for Canada. You've mentioned we are putting into practice our feminist international assistance policy, and the analysis and recommendations are going to be very useful for us as well as for all countries that are looking at achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Canada's feminist international assistance policy focuses our international assistance on the poorest and the most vulnerable, and on the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls as the most effective way to achieve development goals. This approach meshes squarely with the evidence in IFPRI's 2018 report on rising inequalities within countries. Shenggen, you mentioned that in your first slide. And that's a real warning for global prospects for poverty reduction. So what I'd like to do is to mention three key aspects of our policy and ways in which Canada's actions contribute to food security and food systems in developing countries. So first of all, Canada's policy emphasizes growth that works for everyone. That means looking at economic opportunities along agricultural value chains, recognizing that women need to be economically empowered, and that means addressing barriers like land tenure, access to credit, access to technologies, and new production techniques.
Women also need to be at the table, need to express themselves, to express their ideas, their concerns, and what activities should be implemented for the development of their communities and their societies as a whole.
The trade agenda reinforces the growth that works for all framework by promoting a more inclusive global trading system, and that includes us being at the forefront of advocating for gender equality in trade. Unfortunately, we do know that even if people might be pulling back from globalization, pests and diseases are not. The fall armyworm crisis in Africa is an example of that, where a pest native to the Americas has, since early 2016, spread across virtually all of sub-Saharan Africa. This has caused huge damage to crops and often hit the livelihoods of smallholder farmers the hardest, and it has an impact on overall economic growth in the region. In these types of contexts, we need to rethink and rebuild resilient communities and institutions that can adapt to and react to these situations. Canada has taken a multi-pronged approach that includes support to multilateral institutions that can work across these countries and includes support to research that can help protect livelihoods. Second, Canada's policy prioritizes human dignity, and it outlines the fundamental link with nutrition, including through access to nutritious food, sustainable food systems, and the achievement of human rights for women and girls. IFPRI's report notes that conflict plays a devastating role in the worsening of global hunger. Canada is not only a top humanitarian donor, but has also been leading the global efforts towards gender-responsive humanitarian assistance. This means addressing not just the needs of nutrition and food assistance, but also the interlinked needs such as sexual and reproductive health care and protection services. We are emphasizing also the important role of women in peace and security initiatives, because peace is also essential for better nutrition outcomes for families. So Canada's approach to human dignity, with its multiple links with nutrition and food security, demonstrates a more holistic approach in a world that is more complex and increasingly unpredictable. And that notion of unpredictable brings me to the third area I wanted to mention this morning, the issue of climate change. Again, IFPRI's report notes that climate shocks are another key factor that have exacerbated challenges of hunger and food security. Canada's policy acknowledges that climate change, from extreme weather to changing rainfall patterns, droughts, and flooding, has both direct and indirect effects on agricultural production and productivity. But we also know that the influence is both ways. Not only does climate change impact agriculture, but agriculture itself is a major and increasing contributor to global greenhouse gases. To ensure food security while promoting sustainable, lower carbon growth paths, we need also more sustainable and resilient agricultural production. Through Canada's $2.65 billion contribution to climate change, we have committed to supporting developing countries to move to lower carbon economies, and including to helping to support climate-smart agriculture. Our $2.65 billion contribution aims to leverage additional resources from the private sector, because we know that public resources are not enough to reach our SDG goals, and because we know that to truly move to a new economic model, the private sector needs to also move to more sustainable approaches. We want to harness the global financial system to better meet the needs of the real economy, but in a more sustainable way. One of the challenges we'll continue addressing is how to promote climate-smart agriculture, not only amongst large producers, but also to support smallholder farmers, including women farmers, to find the innovations that are going to build more resilient, climate-smart, and gender-smart agriculture systems. So I just want to pull this all together by emphasizing that for all the priority areas of Canada's policy, evidence is key. In particular, we need the evidence for a feminist approach, better sex disaggregated data, research that brings a gendered lens and that empowers women in the research process, and ensuring that knowledge is accessible to both women and men in developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. I want to go to you, Faris. So the report, one of the recommendations that the report makes is there's need for global cooperation to enact policies that actually, take advantage of the benefits of globalization, while at the same time minimizing the risks that might pose for local food systems. And that's quite a broad statement. And I wanted to know, in your experience, what are the approaches that are now working from your work at USC and with your partners to sort of build these strong local food systems, while at the same time ensuring that smallholder farmers and producers are part of the global food system? What is it that we need to be looking out for, and what are some of the lessons you're learning about how to make this work?
Oui, merci beaucoup, Jemimah.
Thank you very much, Jemimah. For me, this is a central issue. It's actually the challenge. And it's not a coincidence that you've asked civil society to speak to this.
And it's a complex one. Some of these tensions are mentioned in the report and also were brought up by Shenggen. I also want to say that when you invited me to the panel, I was realizing that I was standing in the way of a wonderful panel of women, but men often do stand in the way. So we'll try. Shenggen and I will try to do our part. But these tensions are mentioned in the report, and the report really tends to, accentuate the positive. Yesterday I was listening to Aretha Franklin, and that's the song that she became famous for. One of the songs that she became famous for. And if she ever worked at IFPRI or IDRC, which she doesn't, but if she did, she would have said, accentuate the positive of globalization in food security and the impact that it has on food security. But I think she would also say, treat some of these tensions with RESPECT. And I think that's very important. Because we agree that embedded in the questions of globalizations are the questions about food justice that you asked me, and I'll answer in two parts. First, I think we, the international community, really should be concerned about some aspects of globalization. And I'm not talking about the Trumpian response of closing the borders, but really differentiating that from the response of some social movements and farmer organizations who've rightly said, globalization has some harmful impacts, and they've essentially said, be wary of the globalization of agriculture, which after all was a key to the 2008 food price crisis, because of unchecked speculation and investment, which caused price volatility in food commodity markets and financialization of land and led to land displacement. And I guess in some cases it toppled governments. So there is some justification in talking about those aspects of globalization and demanding more control on capital and treating food differently, which is what we're told by some of our colleagues in civil society, and embedding a human rights and a women's rights lens in food policy. They also ask us to safeguard the idea of hundreds of millions of smallholder farmers with their own knowledge systems, who are really the guardians of the world's biodiversity and ecosystems, and that's so important for climate resilience. So I think those things are heard. That's kind of the first part of what I would say. The second part about food justice, the more important part is then, okay, so what kind of globalization do we want? Because it is here to say, it lends itself to a food systems approach, to a systems building approach, I could say. What conditions or what principles could we apply to look at a globalized food policy, which is the subject of this report. And this naturally gives a great role for food policy, because food touches everyone and touches all policies and all aspects of development in the SDGs. So the principles I would really ask for a globalized food policy to uphold would be the following. First, a rights-based approach, rights to food, rights to land and seeds and productive resources. I think Global Affairs also talks about human dignity. It's one of the key pillars of the FIAP. And Shenggen also referred to the idea of access to land. It's a very important piece of the report that's released today. I would also argue for strong and inclusive governance that puts smallholder farmers and food producers at the center of policymaking, and not just farmers, but pastoralists, livestock keepers, fishers, indigenous peoples, landless and agricultural workers. They're all part of the food system who are often left out of the numbers, and emphasizing, of course, youth and women. This can be done, and it's exactly what's being done at the Committee for World Food Security in Rome, which is a very inclusive platform to look at developing policies, norms, and information that informs the four Rome-based agencies, FAO, IFAD, the CG, and the World Food Programme. So it's a great model of inclusive governance and policymaking. I would also ask that a food system develops a policy that sees the future, in the sense that it builds a significantly lower carbon footprint approach to agriculture, to adapt and mitigate, and it makes agriculture a solution rather than the problem that it currently is in climate change. It's responsible, as you all well know, for a significant part of our greenhouse gases. The kind of food policies that puts the value generated by food production back in the hands of those who are actually growing the food, and less of it extracted by input sellers. A food policy that sees the future by building policy incentives for youth to stay on the land. And in my experience, Jemimah, you were asking me in the work that I do in my organization, what really interests youth is a particular kind of approach to agriculture, which is agroecology or ecological agriculture, where they can really benefit from their own knowledge and their ability to innovate, both in terms of technical but also social innovation. They connect directly to those who buy food. They reduce the distance travel that the food has to cover. They experiment with innovative ways of marketing. Those are all things that are happening not only around the world but here in Canada. And they are part of a global picture of food. And I think one of the things they would say is that, you know, we don't want to be the object of somebody else's research. We are researchers, and we want to do our own research. And the last thing, I guess, a policy that looks into the future has to nourish and co-create both globally and locally. The idea of local control is really important, and globalization can and should consist of a network of local food systems as well that are embedded in, for example, a city-region approach. And we're seeing these all across the world now, including in Canada. There's tons of really excellent examples of that happening. Food policy councils that actually govern some of these food sheds, if you like, and bring different stakeholders and rights holders together. So in all, to me, those are some of the building blocks of a 21st century food system and a food policy, and a way to bring the competing narratives of globalization or anti-globalization together and make them work hand in hand.
Thank you, Faris, for helping us imagine that future where globalization actually works for everybody, including smallholder farmers. And it's interesting, I was looking at the report and hoping to see a lot of focus on smallholder farmers. But one of the things that I noted is that the report talks about food prices remaining low in the next couple of years for a number of reasons. And I wondered what's for food net importers, that's a good thing. How does it look like for smallholder farmers? What is that tension between low food prices that benefit a huge part of the population versus benefits to smallholder farmers, who are the biggest investors in the food system? And I think that's also another tension that we need to think about more. How many of you had breakfast today? Like food. You all ate because farmers produced food. And so at the center of this whole conversation is the centrality of farmers, and especially smallholder farmers. And the majority of those are women smallholder farmers. So I'm going to turn to Agnes now. And Agnes, we've known each other very many years. We've, working on gender equality and the links between that and food security. And we know, I think it was one of the IFPRI's Global Hunger Index where you made a correlation between gender inequality and the index. And what it showed was that the most gender unequal countries were also the most food insecure. But this is a conversation that we have had for 30 plus years. And we are seeing the doors open wide again for a conversation about gender equality and the role of women and girls and how to better support women and girls. And from your research, looking forward, what are some of the things that you have learned actually work? Because as I sit in meetings where we're talking about gender inequality, there's still a lot of fuzziness in terms of what works to reduce gender inequalities at a scale and in a sustainable way. What are some of the lessons you've picked that we can now be taking forward, and especially as we seek to achieve both the SDG 2 and the SDG 5?
Thank you, Jemimah. I've really been privileged to have worked with Jemimah over many years as research partners and collaborators addressing this very important issue of what really works to improve gender equality and empower women in agriculture. And I think that one of the key things I've learned is that you listen to the women themselves, because projects and policies only create opportunities. We don't empower women. Women empower themselves. And what agricultural development projects can do is provide opportunities. What policies can do is provide the enabling environment. And so Jemimah and I have been working together, or have been, in the Gender, Agriculture, and Assets projects, where we work with a portfolio of agricultural development projects with a common research methodology, and find out, in the first phase, we were looking at what works best to close the gender asset gap, and in the second phase, we're actually helping projects. We're working together to develop a metric for assessing how well the projects create these opportunities for women's empowerment. And one thing we've also learned from this, and I think this is where I want to bring men on board, is that women can be disempowered because of gender, but they can also be disempowered because of poverty. And this is also true for men. Men are also disempowered by patriarchal structures which don't allow them to step up and be true partners of women, and also by poverty. So understanding the sources of this empowerment is very important to be able to design projects and policies which get at the root cause of these sources of this empowerment. The sources of this empowerment are not going to be the same across all cultures and contexts. And one thing we've really learned is that we need to know what the conditions are on the ground to understand gender norms which are very context specific. So as I was preparing for this talk, I was wondering, how would I know what works best to empower women? And I go back to the approach we took, or we are taking in the GAP 2, the Gender, Agriculture, and Assets Project Phase 2, which is to ask projects themselves, what are you doing? What do you think, what are your strategies that you're employing on the ground? And the range of services and strategies that projects are using range from providing goods and services, strengthening organizations, particularly women's groups, building knowledge and skills, and influencing gender norms. The question is, though, are these strategies really providing opportunities for empowerment? And in analyzing these further, we realize that projects really have three types of strategies. You have strategies which try to reach women, to include them, for example, to reach them in agriculture extension. Projects that aim to benefit them, to improve their well-being, such as their health and nutritional status or their income. But reaching and benefiting women doesn't really mean that you're empowering women, because empowering women means strengthening their ability to make decisions, important decisions, and to act on them. It's really to increase their agency. And so to measure, and a big question here is, there is a research gap on how do we actually measure agency. It's reaching and benefiting. Our M&E systems know how to do this. We know how to count people showing up in seminars. I could count all of you and report back to my bosses that X men and Y women, attended my talk. I could do anthropometrics. I could weigh what you ate, count what you ate for breakfast today. But whether there's empowerment is a big question. So we're now developing with our 13 projects a project-level Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, where we're looking at women's and men's power within, their power to accomplish things, and their power with collective agency. We are, in this project, we are trying to develop metrics of empowerment that the portfolio is going to do throughout the 13 participating projects. And why is that important? And I think this is also a message to our Canadian colleagues. as you go and try to implement your feminist international assistance policy, it's very important to have indicators that you're going to be using throughout your portfolio to know whether you're doing your job. It's very common that civil society organizations that I work with a lot have their own metrics for measuring success. But if you don't have the same metrics, you won't be able to know which strategy is working best to empower women, which one is most effective. Development dollars are scarce. We want to put them to their best use. So this is a plea for very focused research, which works with partners to really find out across the range of activities what is doing best to empower women. And I think I'm going to stop here and say that this is really an area which is ripe for research, but not only researchers in the ivory tower, it's research on the ground working with people who are implementing programs in the field and with communities and women and men themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. I'm going to open up the floor for questions. We have time for just a few, maybe 2 or 3 questions. I would like to ask that you just say your name, the organization that you work for, and be very precise in your questions so that we give opportunities to as many people as we can. And there are mics on the 2 aisles on the side, so if you stand there, then I'll know that you want to ask a question. And you can also now ask your questions on Shenggen's presentation as well. Any questions? I see John there. If you have a question, stand on either side, then I'll see you.
Yes, I wanted to raise to the panel the issue about, we've talked a lot about agricultural transformation and smallholder farmers, but the parts of the world, the low and middle income countries, are very dynamic. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's a food system transformation, and a lot of this transformation is not happening on the farm. It's happening before the farm, it's happening after the farm. Mm-hmm. If we look at, for example, smallholder dairy in East Africa, a lot of the value added is coming from people who are taking the milk from the farm to small shops and things like that. People who are feeding the cows, insurance. There's a whole range of things. So more about maybe what's this food system transformation that's going to be broader. As countries develop, it's going to be a food system transformation. It's not just an agricultural transformation. So what are the views there on that?
Okay, fantastic. I have another one there. Start with your name so that we know
Hello,
who you are.
The name is Ian McGillivray. Formerly with CEDA. I am now retired, and I can't help expressing before my question the pleasure of listening to Shenggen, to my colleagues at IDRC, to Szabo, who has now crossed the bridge, if you like, back into government, and Agnes's incredible work and advice that you're providing the government as we move forward on really strengthening the empowerment of women in Canada and abroad. It just makes me feel good that we made important decisions in the past, like IDRC, about supporting the CG and IFPRI with its evidence-based research. So congratulations. My question relates a little bit to my recent past in working with the high-level task force on global food security and the food crisis that was set up in 2008, 2009 to address the issue of coordination. And I'm talking about global coordination. Shenggen mentioned the IPCC, and there were a lot of heads nodding at the wiseness of that panel, and that something should be set up similarly for food security and nutrition. Mm-hmm. I guess my question more is to the Canadian government, given its leadership on issues related to agriculture, food, and nutrition, together with IDRC. What efforts, given its strong support to the multilateral system, it's going to be doing, given that this report, essentially from Joachim von Braun, former Director General of IFPRI, essentially says that in the next 20 years, we're not going to make it unless we do something about improved coordination and changing the system so that it's not the same one. So I'd like to hear some thoughts in terms of what leadership Canada can play in this difficult time. Thank you.
Any question from that end of the room? The middle of the room? Okay. Any question for Shenggen?
That question.
Okay.
For me, Well, not really question. I mean, the question to the panel?
No, for you. Okay, I'm gonna let the panel answer. So we have two questions. One about looking at the food system in a more holistic way, and not just thinking about agricultural transformation, but food systems transformation, and how we get that done moving forward, and how we start thinking that holistic manner. And a specific question to Sue on Canada's leadership in terms of global coordination around food security. So any of you can answer the first question. Anyone willing to take that on? Faris?
I'm the only one? I was, yesterday when we had a chat with IFPRI, I was talking about an amazing report that came out last year by the IPES Food panel of experts, and the title of the report was From Uniformity to Diversity, the transition to a more diversified agroecological system, food system. And in that report, they pointed out, of course, they made a strong case for that transition, and who can argue against transition? But they also kind of gave a picture of why that transition isn't going as fast as it could, what it could look like. And one of the things that they really pointed out was the role of research and development. And I'm in a research crowd, so that seems to be the natural thing to talk about. And they said, if you look at research and development going into certain types of food systems, and where the majority of it is really going to food production technologies, and if you spread that over the food system, if you look at consumption, if you look at waste, if you look at storage and other areas where there's lots of knowledge, but it isn't always translating into good research and R&D, that's a very, very natural area that could support transition to a food system. And I think I talked about earlier the notion that the knowledge that's coming from food providers and smallholder farmers is quite important in building in. So my plea would be more research in that area. I can also have a quick comment on global coordination, because I had mentioned earlier that the Committee for World Food Security is about global norm setting and policy setting across the 4 agencies, and it really is quite an inclusive political project that has revolutionary implications for global policy making. And if you haven't studied it, you do take a look at the CFS and how it works. It's very, very inclusive. Civil society, private sector, everybody has a role. We can raise our flags at any time, make interventions, we can negotiate text, etc. So there is a model.
I want to throw one spin into that question, and one of the conversations we've been having within our agriculture food security team the last week is, as we think about transforming the food system, how do we ensure that gender is part and parcel of that? Because in the past, what we've done is imagine a food system or imagine an agriculture system, and then we start integrating gender into it. How do we basically build a gender transformative food system that's inclusive and that benefits all? And I don't know whether, Agnes, you have a minute, you can take a minute to help us imagine what that looks like.
So thank you, Jemimah. This is actually an area of work that Jemimah has worked on a lot in terms of looking at gender in value chains. And I think if we're going to try to develop a gender-responsive food system, one needs to understand what are the roles that men and women play on the farm and within their households. Because a lot of the constraints that women face restrict their opportunity to grow high-value crops or nutritious crops. They restrict their ability to maintain control of income from these new crops and enterprises which are entering the rural scene. It often limits their incentive to commercialize, because once they start losing control of the income, as Jemimah has shown in her work, it limits their incentive to do so. And so I think that it's quite important to look at how different value chain actors, how men and women at different stages of the value chain and at different stages of the food system are affected by all these changes, and what whether being in a particular food system is empowering or not. I think that it's an area that we have not really looked at in a very comprehensive way, but which we can.
So you want to add on the global coordination?
Sure. I'm going to make a couple of points also to link to what you were just saying about gender transformative food systems. I would echo Faris's points about some of the global coordination issues because one of the things we have seen across the globe is that it is not easy, but certainly one can set up new mechanisms or institutions, but it's very difficult to see these institutions adapt over time. And there are tremendous transaction costs that are involved in any new layer of institutions or coordination mechanisms. And that is within a context where we do have tremendous resource constraints, and we know that the price tag for achieving the SDGs is very high. So there are some trade-offs there, and we really need to look at what the architecture is now. And that's one of the things we're doing, my second point, in terms of gender and Canada's G7 year. So we have a global G7 food security working group, and one of the things we've done is gone and looked at the data. The data on spending by G7 members actually shows that in terms of agriculture spending, the proportion of agriculture spending that actually either targets gender or includes some sort of gender-based analysis is incredibly low. So what this tells us is it's not just about increasing resources, it's about better spending of the resources we have. We've also tried to work with the Rome-based agencies, a project around gender within the three agencies, because we know it's very important, again, that we look across the organizations we have now, and again, same theme, where can we work better with what we have by sharing experiences? So just to point out those two pieces.
Thank you, Sue. The last minute of the panel to Shenggen.
Yeah, Jemimah, thank you very much. I think on the food system, yes, absolutely, we must go beyond just production. The Paul Durasch's division shows that actually post-production, post-harvesting accounts for a big share of that whole system. And women, smallholders must benefit, and the youth must benefit from that whole food system. I also very much agree there are enough local food systems. The global food system basically is a combination or consists of all kinds of national food systems, local food systems. Now, just a couple of comments. One is 2007-2008 food crisis. That's exactly why we failed on trade. It started with climate change. So you pointed to that very well. It started in Australia, drought. That hit the wheat price. Wheat price went up. And then Argentina, again drought. Wheat price. Then begin to, the wheat, rice, maize, they substitute each other. That pushed the maize price also very high, and together with higher oil price. Oil price has always have a strong link with food price. Why the food price is low, you mentioned, because oil price is low. So what happened? Because the countries begin to use trade export bans to ban the exports. The food price is tripled, doubled, tripled. Right in the case of rice, in 6 months it doubled. So yes, absolutely, the speculation is there. I mean, proper speculation that can help the smooth market. Yan is a good economist. Thank you. So how do you balance that? On the one hand, you have proper regulation to make sure that market will work. Market will not be monopolized by some big players like Goldman Sachs or others. But in the meantime, make sure that trade remains open, transparent. I mean, this is so critical. Now, I also heard about the lower food price, what to do with the smallholders. To be frank, sometimes to solve the agriculture problem, we have to go out of agriculture. My experience in China and India is farmers move out. They move to the cities, and they move to non-farm. When they move to farm to non-farm, they earn higher income. And the farmers left behind can consolidate the farm size, increase the farm size. So I call it move up or move out. For certain farmers, they must move out if there are opportunities in urban centers in non-farm. And for the farmers left behind, they have to move up to engage with high-value, nutritious, healthy food production. Meantime, the consumers are willing to pay higher prices. If we just stuck with the smallholders, in Kenya, in Uganda, with half a hectare of land, even you increase your production by another 50%, you know that when the production increase, prices go down. Farmers don't benefit much with the consumers.
Thank you very much, Shenggen. We have to close this exciting panel, so please join me in thanking Szabo, Faris, Ahmed, Agnes, and Shenggen. And I invite Santiago to...
Thank you, everyone. I wanted just to close with first a thank you, a very big thank you to Michel Gagnon and his team in Global Affairs, John and your team in IFPRI, the FAS team and communication team in IDRC, because they have been able to put together this amazing panel and the presentation. I think it's a perfect panel, as Jemimah was saying. A couple of remarks that I want to share. We cannot have 800 million people suffering from hunger. That's not acceptable. That's 800 million too many. The other thing is that the timing is perfect and that we can do it. I think we have here a lot about evidence, and the way that we measure what we do at the change in agency is going to inform and influence the policies and investments that we do. But I also think there was a strong message that the globalization that we want to have has to be a globalization that works for everyone. And I think that's something that unites us, all the 3, 4, 5 agencies that we have in this event. And I know that all of our participants are also under that principle and belief. I want to thank you very much, everyone. We are on time, actually. I think it's kind of for the first time that we finish something on time. We started on time. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. Be tuned, because we will continue having this kind of events. IDRC, really, we have one with FAO. We have this one with IFPRI. We want to have these ones every 4 or 5 months. So be tuned to our website. We will try to send emails to all your lists. Thank you for coming. And everyone, thank you.